Hey everyone, welcome to Two Car Bros. My name is Ryan and today we are continuing our how to build a GM LS LM7 5.3 liter V8 part number 6. Today we are going to be focusing on the timing set, the oil pump, and the front cover. So I made the front cover and timing chain and oil pump all one video because they're all basically related to each other. So once you're done with the front, we can move on to the rear in the next video. Before I go any further, I want to mention that this video is sponsored by Summit Racing. They're not sending me any money, but they are sending me some choice products that we're going to be using in the video. All the links will be located down below in the description, and make sure you buy all your speed parts from summitracing.com. And if you've missed any of the other LM7 videos we've been doing, you can check down below in the description. I put them in a big playlist here on YouTube, so you can just put it to the first one and sit back and relax and watch an LM7 5.3 liter that's 30,000 sober board be built. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first thing we're going to do today is put our timing set on. Now in a previous video I already put the camshaft gear on its home. We're gonna have to remove that back off in order to install our timing set. So the other pieces of our timing set are our chain, which I have soaking here in a nice high quality Mobil 1 full synthetic oil that's clean. The viscosity is not really important. And then our oil drive and our crankshaft sprocket here. And if you'll look closely, so you have a bunch of different settings here on your crankshaft sprocket. And what's really cool about this is you have 4 settings for a retarded timing situation and 4 settings for an advanced. And why you might want to do that is if you have an advanced timing situation, your power is going to come in lower on the rev range. You're going to get more torque on the bottom end. But if you have a retarded situation, the further you go on the R side, you're going to get your power later on in the rev range higher to your red line. So in our situation though, we're gonna run it at 0, or what's called straight up sometimes. So we're just gonna leave it straight up so we kind of get the best of both worlds. That's the way I like doing it. And then I also wanted to point out on our cam card here, this is our camshaft specification card, it has a +3 advance on it, just there. And I thought originally that means to set up your timing at +3, but I was wrong. I called Summit's technical support line and they said that the camshaft has that +3 built into the cam to begin with. So run it at straight up and you'll have a little bit of advance anyways. So we can remove our camshaft sprocket here, and the reason we installed this was for installation purposes of other components in the engine, because without this your camshaft can just fall out the back of the engine, but it can't fall forward because of that thrust plate. So that's the reason we installed that, but it's not in its final installation. So we're gonna grab our 10mm socket and take this back off so we can put our timing set on. We can just walk this off. Just be careful because right now the camshaft can fall at the back of the engine, so don't just push on it. So what you're looking at now is our Woodruff key. I've actually painted it gold for your viewing ease. Now a lot of people think that the Woodruff key should be pointing straight up and down. That's not true. The Woodruff key is actually supposed to point at the number 1 cylinder. Once the Woodruff key is pointed at number 1, we know that number 1 is on top dead center, which is what we want to put our timing set on. At the back of the engine, I have some of those crankshaft bolts in there I showed in a previous video. What we can do is move it using leverage to our advantage, so that way our Woodruff key is pointing straight up at number 1 off to the right. So once your Woodruff key is pointed in the correct direction up towards cylinder number 1 here, you'll notice that we are at top dead center. So our crankshaft is in the correct position for us to install our timing set. So we can see our Woodruff key pointed up perfectly on this plane up at cylinder number 1. So you might notice I'm wearing an oven mitt while holding the crankshaft sprocket here. That's because I've had it in the oven and it's about 200 degrees right now, so it's pretty warm. You could also leave it out in the sun on a very hot day and achieve a similar result. And we're doing that so the metal expands, so it's easier to install. It's gonna be a little clumsy for us. So on this point, we're going to get our 0, like I explained earlier, and place it on that. So again, the reason we heated it up is so that it'll tap on a lot easier. So when you're doing this, they do make special tools that you can tap this on. So we have an 1 5/8" socket that fits over the crank snout. That's gonna work just as well. And we're just gonna lightly tap it on. Don't go crazy on this one because you'll mess up the thrust action of the crankshaft. we go, that sound means it's done. All right, so now we're ready to install our timing set. I wanted to also mention that I have our camshaft gear down in that oil with our chain as well. So this is gonna be messy kind of no matter what, because it's all soaked in oil. So I like to have like a catch basin underneath me where I'm working. And then you always want to keep in mind where this little ping is, this little dot is, because that's going to be important later. So we can do, put the chain on, or one tooth off. There we go. And I have a helper holding the back of my cam for me so it doesn't just fall out. There we go. In. It's kind of an oily, goopy mess, but it is better to over lubricate than to under lubricate. These are 10mm bolts we got from ARP. Now our timing set is basically in its home, and we can go ahead and go over the orientation of these two gears to each other. So these two dots, this one here on the camshaft side and this one here on the crankshaft side, have to point at each other. They have to be in relation. If those two are off, they'll be off by a lot. It's called being off by a tooth, and it'll be very noticeable, and you'll either be in a too advanced or a too retarded timing situation, and your timing will never be quite right. So these two dots need to line up with each other. So now we're ready to torque these 10mm bolts to spec, which is 26 foot-pounds. So we can go ahead and grab our torque wrench here. And I'm actually not going to go straight to 26 right away. I'm actually just going to kind of feel it out and tighten them up evenly. So that way I know that the sprocket sits down nice and even. So I've walked those in by hand first. Just want to do this as evenly as possible. There we go, 26. 26, and 26. So now we're torqued down, so we know that the camshaft sprocket is properly seated, which is always good. But now what we're going to do is we're going to run the bolts out one at a time, and we're going to put some Loctite on. We're going to clean those threads up too, because a little bit of oil got on there. I'm going to clean those up. Put some Loctite on there. And then we can reinstall it and re-torque it. There we go. Grab our torque wrench, set to 26 foot-pounds, and we're going to torque it once again. Just like that. And then just do that for these other two. So now we can worry about our oil pump situation. We are sponsored by Summit Racing. They sent over this unit here. Here's our part number, and there is a link down below in the description. This is a Summit made part. It's a high performance LS oil pump. I'm very excited to get using it because our old one was junk. So we can take it out of the box and take a look at it. Already I can tell it's pretty darn high quality. Made right here in the US of A, which is always appealing. And before we go any further, I want to go over basically a very important component of this oil pump, which is our regulator spring here. So behind this plug, I'm not going to take it out, there's a governor spring in here. Since you're using hydraulic pressure, liquid cannot be compressed, Pascal's law. So it needs a spring in here to relieve it in case pressure becomes too high. So if you have a broken spring in here, you'll have basically no oil pressure or very low oil pressure. And if you have too strong of a spring in here, you'll have too high oil pressure. So you need to get the one that's just right. But I promise you the one that comes in the Summit unit is just right. So it does come with two O-rings here. The green one's a little bit thicker and the black one's a little bit thinner. And that's going to go on our oil pickup, and we'll discuss that later when we put the oil pickup on, and some instructions on how to install those O-rings, and again we'll go over that later. So we have our stainless steel bowl full of clean oil that we took our timing chain out of, and we're going to go ahead and put our oil pump in there, and then we're going to top it off with even more clean oil. You can't have enough lubrication in this situation. You can even flip it over, get it all in every single crevice you can. Just go inside the drive gear with your finger like this and make it act like it's kind of sucking oil up into it, like it would be if it was in the engine. You can even see on camera a little bit that as I actuate with my fingers, it's kind of sucking oil up, which is good. That's what we want. and we get this thing fully lubricated and ready for installation. So once again, I have my oven mitt on because I heated this up very hot in the oven, so it'll slide on easier. Our oil pump drive gear here. Let me put that on. And again, we're gonna grab our 1 5/8" socket. We're just gonna tap that home. That sound means it's done. So now we can install our oil pump, and again, it is going to be goopy. So maybe don some gloves. Go ahead and pick it out of our goop here. And you might think that it goes on this way, but it doesn't. It actually goes on with the black plate facing you. And there's no gasket between the oil pump and the block here. Because there's a very small amount of oil that would leak out of there, and since it's internal, it's just going to bleed right back into the oil pan. Don't really worry about that too terribly much. Just go ahead and install her. Kind of jostle it around like that. And then it'll stay in place, which is super cool. Just make sure all the main surfaces are clean before you install your oil pump. I already did when we were cleaning the engine up. And these bolts I will leave a link to in the description for the oil pump. They're just a 10mm bolt. They're used all over the engine, very common. And when you're tightening things or even installing bolts, I always like going in a cross pattern just to make sure that the pump sits down as evenly as possible, no matter what. There we go, now we can tighten it. So our torque spec for the oil pump is 18. We're gonna go ahead and set our torque wrench to that and tighten these up in a cross pattern. So we're always forming an X. Just like that. So the next thing I want to talk about is this engine plug kit from Summit Racing. They sent this on over, and it is absolutely essential to putting your engine back together, and I'll explain what these plugs do. So these 3 silver ones, 1 or 2 of them are for oil gallery plugs, and 1 of them is for a coolant plug. Luckily, ours are still in. These 3 are in from our machine shop, so we don't have to replace them. But this big brass plug that goes into the water jacket, I'm pretty sure that's where the engine block heater would go if it was option to go there. We don't have that, we're never gonna have that, so we gotta put this in. And then we also have this. This is part of oil control, which goes through the oil gallery, and you will see that on the back of the engine. But the one we're really gonna focus on right now before we put the front cover on is this cute little button one at the end of my fingertip there. That one has to go on before your front cover does, or you won't have any oil pressure because the oil pump will just pump into the oil gallery and it'll bleed right back into the pan. So now we can install our brass oil plug here with the cup facing inward. Like that, we can kind of set in with our thumb there. And then what I have here is an 8mm socket, and we're just going to tap that in with a hammer until the brass surface here is flush with our block. So I want to mention too, don't go too crazy on this. There is no safety to protect you from just sending it further and further into the block. So, you know, when this surface is nice and flush with the countersunk surface at the end of my fingertip, go ahead and stop. You're done. Okie dokie, so now we can move on to our front timing cover. This is our original timing cover off that super grubby 260,000 mile engine that we had earlier. I had it hot tanked and I got it back from our machine shop, and then I took a wire wheel to it and scuffed it up and got a lot of that oxidation off. And then I masked it all up and I put a nice engine primer on it, and then the engine primer itself. So we're just reusing this part. It's a nice cheap way to get away with using some old parts here that look pretty snazzy. And then what I want to go over too is on the bottom mating surface here, make sure this is really clean and never ever paint it. Also, that applies to this surface on the rear of the cover as well. But you might have noticed
our front seal is still in here, and that seal is very, very old, and we need to pound it out. What I'm gonna do is take some painter's tape and tape over my nice paint job, so that way I don't mar it in any kind of way when I'm trying to get this seal out, because it's gonna be a little bit of a challenge. And even if you chip the paint a bit of touch-up paint is not bad either. So I have our timing cover here on some just some 2x4s I've cut up. This is going to give us enough room for the seal to go somewhere while also being nice and stable, and it shouldn't mar our paint too bad. And I've also put some of this green tape on the show side. So in order to get this seal out, you can use one of these. This is a bearing and race driver installation and removal tool. This is the proper tool to use, but if you didn't have this, which is understandable, you could use a chisel or a big standard screwdriver and put it on the back here of the seal and just tap it out. It's really not difficult. That's actually how I removed the rear cover seal. But since we're on camera, I'm gonna go ahead and grab the proper tool. I want to keep this nice and centered. There we go. Remove our tool, and that's what it should look like with that seal out of the way. And we're gonna go ahead and clean up all the gunk in that race there. So our new seal is made by AC Delco. This is the seal for this front timing cover, sent to us by Summit Racing. The link is down below in the description. I always recommend using OEM seals because they always seem to work really well. So the seal can technically go in two ways. With this big channel facing outward or inward, this channel here needs to face inward, so the seal, kind of the lips of it, are facing down. So what we're going to do is take some of our old friend black RTV, put it on the end of our fingertip here, and then we're going to apply it around our new front seal here. And what this is going to do is not only lubricate it so it's a little bit easier to put in, it's going to help seal against any kind of oil. There we go. Got some RTV on there, very good. We can just set that in its new home. Now, what you could do is use a piece of bar steel and lay it across and, you know, try to pound it in nice and correct. But again, we have this nice race and driver tool, so we're going to use it. Also, another note I wanted to mention is you can buy these front seal or these front covers with the seal already pre-installed. You can do that too. Just gonna make sure this is nice and square. Okay. Oh, it's amazing. And there we go, that's what it should look like. Now, a cool tip I have for you, especially with this neat tool, is you want to hammer it in as square as possible. So if you're going like this into the seal, and it kind of goes a little crooked on you, what you can do is take the middle handle out and just tap on this side of the tool, and it should level it back out for you. So I want to go over too is how you know you're done hammering the seal in is that these two surfaces here and here will be nice and flush with each other. Don't go crazy on this. You can actually ruin the seal by hammering on it too much or too hard. So checking out our bolts today, they're made by ARP. They are for an LS1, LS2 hex timing cover kit. They are my absolute favorite fastener company. Summit Racing sent these over so we can use these to affix our timing cover to the front of our engine. So before we start bolting things on, I wanted to go over these washers that come with our ARP kit. So you can kind of see down in there, they have a little bit of a beveled edge. It's facing towards the camera right now, as opposed to the rear that's completely flat. The way you're gonna put that on is the bevel edge towards the head of the bolt, just like this. So I'm going to explain that once, and that applies to every bolt that we are going to be working with today for the timing cover. And for our gasket, it is an AC Delco. There is our part number. The link is down below in the description, sent over by Summit Racing once again. What I kind of like about this one is it has this nice steel core, and it has a nice rubber insert here, so that means we really don't have to deal with any RTV. If we do deal with some RTV in the future, I will point that out, but you don't need any between the timing cover gasket and the front of the engine. And what I think is really funny about this particular one is it was supposed to go to a Chevrolet dealer, but it ended up with me instead. So now we're ready to put our timing cover on. What I wanted to mention is that I've cleaned this mating surface very well with some carburetor spray. If you're wondering what this is, it isn't residual gasket. It's actually like a coating of some sort that they put on from the factory, and it kind of bled in, and it's like think of it like a scar. It's completely flat and clean, so don't worry about that. And then I also wanted to mention that I cleaned the mating surface on the back of the timing cover. And then the other tip I have for you is make sure that your gasket is on correctly. You can tell by this little kick out goes on the left, so don't flip it over. And then what's kind of cool about this gasket is you can put the bolt through and it'll kind of hold on for you. So I'm going to do the top two so it can't go crooked on me. And check that out, right? And then we can go ahead and put these on finger tight. And you can massage the gasket around with your fingers to make sure it's getting in the correct orientation for you to put bolts in. See right there, I just moved that with my middle finger so the bolt would line up right. So I'm not going to tighten them down to torque just yet. I'm just going to give them a little bit of tightness so the pan will lay down flat, and you want to go as in cross pattern as possible. Never do bolts right next to each other. Always try to go to the other side of the cover here. This will ensure that it sits down nice and flush. So I flipped the engine over before I gave the bolts final tightening. They're on kind of hand tight. And what you want to look for, this gasket surface here needs to be even with this gasket surface here for the oil pan, and ours is down about a 32nd of an inch, so that will actually leak, and it will leak the other way too if it's too tall. They need to be exactly even with each other. So I'm going to give that a little, some taps. And now I can feel on both sides of my finger here that this surface and this surface are exactly even. Now we can tighten it down. Also, having the timing cover in its proper spot with these two surfaces even with each other lines up the concentricity of the seal with the dampener later on. So the torque spec we're looking for today is 18 foot-pounds, and we're going to tighten that as much as a cross pattern as possible, just like you would do, you know, lug nuts on a wheel. And I haven't had the wrench go off yet because I haven't reached 18 foot-pounds yet, so I'm just tightening them up, you know, little bits at a time, because I don't want to go directly to that torque figure. I want to have it on nice and even. So now I'm restarting. There's 18. And our final 18 is right here, and our front cover is on correctly. So the next thing we're going to do is replace this brass plug here. It goes in the side of the water jacket. And what this would do normally is have an engine block heater in it, but ours isn't going to have that, nor is it ever going to. So we're going to go ahead and replace that with that brass plug kit we got earlier. It already has Loctite on it, which is super cool. And it takes an absurdly large Allen, so that might be something you'll have to buy, because I didn't have one. I had to buy this. So something to think about. So once it gets to this stage, it needs to be on pretty tight. So now we can flip our large Allen here, you know, long ways here, and grab a plastic hammer. And this is a good way to make sure we get this plug in pretty darn tight.
So that's how to put on your front cover, timing chain, and oil pump on a 5.3 liter LS engine. It was pretty simple. Honestly, that was not difficult at all, and the gasket was really nice to work with, and the torque specifications felt just right. So it's nice that this whole thing is coming together absolutely perfectly. I have to thank Summit Racing again for sponsoring this build. It has been an absolute pleasure to work with them, so make sure you buy all your speed parts from summitracing.com. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe by hitting that button down below and clicking the bell notification. I hope I've earned that from you today, so you don't miss any more 5.3 liter content or big block content. Yes, the big block is coming back, I promise. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.